Jesus said, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." 40 years later, it happened. This is the end of the age. This is Seek, Go, Create. You're listening to Read the New Testament in 90 days, 27 books, in order, in context. We've been walking through the New Testament in the order that it was written. This is the final episode. You should have, if you've been reading along, finished up Revelation, and now this is kind of a wrap up and a conclusion. If you have walked through the whole journey with us, congratulations. You just read the entire New Testament in the order it was written. That is no small thing. Congratulations. If for some reason you've stumbled into this as your first episode you found, welcome, but don't start here. This is actually the ending of about 28 episodes going all the way back to the beginning of the New Testament. And if you need to catch up, visit k2m.foundation/NT90 and get the reading plan. And also you can get all the links for all the other episodes and start in order. The reason we've done this is to experience the New Testament in context, the way the first churches did, book by book, letter by letter, as the story unfolded. Now, let's talk about, we've finished our reading. We've gone through all the New Testament. That brought us all the way up to the year about AD 68 is when John wrote the book of Revelation. Now, what you're about to hear is what actually happened. It isn't theology. This is actual history. Let's finish it up and connect all of the dots. This is documented by eyewitnesses, confirmed by Roman historians, and it lines up with Scripture point by point in a way that's hard to dismiss. We've spent 90 days reading letters written to churches facing real crisis. The letters were warning of something coming, letters telling believers to hold fast because the end was near. Now, let's look at what they were pointing to, because this isn't speculation. This is documented history. Okay, let's go back to the year AD 66, the turbulent 60s that we talked about as we read along. This was somewhat the breaking point. For decades, tensions between Jews and Romans had been building. In AD 66, it exploded. A Roman procurator seized temple funds. Riots broke out in Caesarea and Jerusalem. Jewish rebels took control of the temple and slaughtered the Roman garrison. Rome could not let this stand. The empire sent its legions. All right, let's move forward. In AD 67, Galilee falls. The Roman general Vespasian arrived with 60,000 troops. He arrived in the area, not in Jerusalem, okay? He moved systematically through Galilee, crushing resistance town by town. Thousands died. Thousands more fled south. Refugees were pouring into Jerusalem, swelling the city's population far beyond what it could sustain. And then in AD 68, there was chaos on both sides. In June, Emperor Nero committed suicide. Rome plunged into civil war. 4 emperors would rise and fall in a single year. Meanwhile, inside Jerusalem, 3 Jewish factions turned on each other. John of Gischala, Simon Bar Giora, and Eleazar ben Simon. I hope I pronounced all 3 of those correctly. They fought for control of the city while Rome regrouped. So there was infighting going on within Jerusalem, and Rome still hadn't even arrived there. They burned each other's grain supplies, warehouses full of food that could have sustained the city for years. civil war inside a siege that hadn't even fully begun yet. In 69, the siege tightens. Vespasian was declared emperor and left for Rome. His son Titus took command of the Jewish campaign. By spring of AD 70, Titus surrounded Jerusalem with 4 Roman legions. And then in the year AD 70, we'll call it the end, or the end of the age, the siege lasted for 5 months inside the walls. Famine took hold. People ate leather. They ate grass. They ate things no human should eat. We'll get to that later. In August, Romans breached the walls. Street by street, they fought their way to the temple. On the 9th of Av, the same calendar date, the Babylonians had destroyed Solomon's temple 656 years earlier. The second temple burned and was destroyed. The soldiers tore the temple apart stone by stone, scraping gold from the cracks where it had melted. The city was leveled. When it was over, visitors couldn't even tell the site had ever been inhabited. Now, all of that is historical, but I actually think it's important to understand the source of those items. So let's talk about Josephus. This is how we know those details. We actually had an eyewitness. Let's talk about who he was. He was a Jewish priest, a Pharisee, born around AD 37, just a few years after Jesus' resurrection. When the revolt broke out, he was appointed military commander in Galilee. He fought against Rome, and he was captured in AD 67. Instead of being executed, he became a translator and advisor to the Roman generals Vespasian and Titus. He watched the entire siege of Jerusalem from the Roman camp. He saw the famine, the factions, the fire. Years later, he wrote it all down in a massive work called The Jewish War. Josephus, this is important, wasn't a Christian. He had no theological reason to prove Jesus right. But his account reads like a fulfillment list, detail after detail matching what Moses warned in Deuteronomy and what Jesus prophesied on the Mount of Olives. He recorded the total number of prisoners taken during the entire war was 97,000. Of those who perished during the siege from the beginning to the end, the number was 1,100,000, which was about a third of what they believe was in and around Jerusalem at the time. He also wrote, "No other city has ever endured such miseries, and no generation has ever been more prolific in wickedness than this one." The language echoes Jesus' words in Matthew 24. "There will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will." And Josephus wasn't the only one. The Roman historian Tacitus, no friend to Christians or Jews, also documented the war and the signs that accompanied it. 2 independent witnesses from opposing sides. Let's talk about the signs in the heavens that were recorded during that event. Both Josephus and Tacitus both recorded strange signs in the years before Jerusalem fell. They recorded a star resembling a sword that hung over the city. A comet was visible for an entire year. Armies were seen fighting in the clouds. Massive bronze doors of the temple opened on their own. A voice was heard from the inner sanctuary saying, "Let us depart from here. Now, you can interpret those however you want, but both historians recorded them. And in the Old Testament, language like the sun darkened, the moon turned to blood, stars falling was always covenant, judgment, imagery, not literal cosmic collapse. Isaiah used it for Babylon's fall. Ezekiel used it for Egypt. Joel used it for the day of the Lord, and Peter quoted Joel at Pentecost and said, "This is what was spoken." Here's a detail that should stop us in our tracks. Jesus told his followers, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." They listened. The early church historian Eusebius records that the Jerusalem church received a prophetic warning and fled across the Jordan to a town called Pella before the siege closed. Not a single Christian is recorded dying in the destruction of Jerusalem. Again, it's not recorded. We don't know for a fact, but it appears as if the warning Jesus gave in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 wasn't abstract, it was practical, and it saved believers who heeded that warning. Okay, now this is powerful. Let's connect prophecy to actual historical events. This is what I like to do. It's connecting the dots. What did Scripture say would happen and what actually happened? All right, let's look at Old Testament warnings fulfilled. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. You may want to come back, slow it down, and go check your Scripture. I'm going to try to give the references so you can check it later. All right, let's look at what Moses laid out, the covenant curses in Deuteronomy 28. These curses were clear. If Israel broke the covenant, judgment would come. Here's what he said, and I'm going to match it up with what Josephus recorded. Moses' warning in Deuteronomy 28. A nation from afar, a nation of fierce countenance. That is in verse 49 and 50. And what Josephus recorded was that Rome came from far away and their military standard was the eagle. Moses said in verse 52, "They shall besiege you at all your gates." Titus surrounded Jerusalem completely in AD 70. Every wall fell. In verse 53 and 57 of Deuteronomy, Moses says, "You shall eat the flesh of your sons and daughters." Pretty graphic. Josephus records a woman named Mary who killed and ate her own infant during the siege in AD 70. Verse 64, "The Lord will scatter you among all peoples." After AD 70, the Jewish diaspora became total. They were totally dispersed from Jerusalem. All right, now let's jump to the New Testament and Jesus' warnings that were fulfilled. In Matthew 24, Jesus told his disciples exactly what would happen and when. Here's the fulfillment. Okay. The temple was destroyed, not one stone left. Matthew 24:2. We know the temple burned and was dismantled in August of AD 70. False messiahs will arise. We saw that in Matthew 24, verse 5 and verse 24. We saw them. Theudas the Egyptian and Simon Bar-Giora all were recorded by Josephus as being false messiahs. Wars and rumors of wars. Matthew 24, 6 through 7, and we know the Jewish-Roman War of AD 66 through 73 fulfilled that. Famines, Matthew 24, 7. Claudius famine that was noted in Acts 11:28, and then also the famine that occurred during the siege in Jerusalem in and around AD 70. Persecution of believers, Matthew 24:9. Stephen, James, Peter, Paul, all martyred, and many others before AD 70. the gospel preached to all nations, from Matthew 24:14. Paul wrote in Colossians 1:23 that the gospel had been proclaimed in all creation. The abomination of desolation in Matthew 24:15. Roman standards with their idolatrous images set up in the temple courts. That was historical. We saw that. And then, like we mentioned earlier, flee to the mountains, Matthew 24:16 through 20. Christians fled to Pella across the Jordan. That was recorded by the historian Eusebius. And then the Great Tribulation, unlike any before, from Matthew 24:21. Josephus called it the worst siege in history. And then Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things occur. Matthew 24:34. Jesus spoke that around AD 30, 40 years later. The temple fell, the Great Tribulation, all of that destruction occurred at the AD 70 event in August of AD 70. 40 years, one generation. All right, and we have just finished reading through the New Testament in order, and one theme that we saw was that the apostles knew that this was coming. The New Testament writers use language of imminence because they knew the clock was ticking. They had that generation in mind. In Acts 2:16 through 17, Peter at Pentecost said, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel in the last days. 1 Corinthians 10:11, Paul, on whom the ends of the ages have come. James 5:8 through 9, the coming of the Lord is at hand. The judge is standing at the door. 1 Peter 4:7, the end of all things is at hand. And then finally, Revelation 1:1 and 3, things that must soon take place. The time is near. They were not talking about events 2,000 years in their future. They were talking about events in their immediate future, events that came to pass exactly as Jesus said. Moses warned about it 1,500 years before it happened. Jesus said it would come within one generation. The apostles said it was imminent, and then it happened, exactly as described, documented by people who had no interest in proving the Bible right. We can be excited and comforted knowing that the accurate predictions and prophecies of the Bible actually occurred. Now, what does this mean for us? Where does this leave us now? First of all, I think it's important to know the kingdom is here. It arrived with Jesus. It's not something we're waiting for. It was vindicated when the old covenant system ended in AD 70 when, as we saw in Revelation, Jesus Christ was revealed. The shadows gave way to the substance. The temple made with hands was replaced by the temple of living stones, Christ's body, his church, his people filled with his spirit. The kingdom continues to expand. The parables told us it would grow. Mustard seed to tree, leaven spreading through dough. It's been growing and it's been growing and growing for 2,000 years, and it continues to grow. Is God doing more? Always. Some people get uncomfortable thinking, well, if most of these things occurred, what's God doing now? What does that leave? God is still acting and operating through us as citizens of his kingdom. We have the responsibility to continue helping that kingdom to grow. God is always doing more. The story isn't over. We are part of that story. We live in hope. We trust that God continues to work and will bring all things to completion in his way and in his timing. But here's what changes when we understand all of this. We can now read the scripture in its proper context and then apply it to our lives. not taking it and trying to twist it into something that's going on in our world today and predicting future items and things like that. That's how we end up misapplying Scripture. We don't have to twist it first. We don't have to take first century letters to fit a modern end time systems. We don't have to force the language of imminence to mean something it never meant. We don't have to decode newspaper headlines looking for signs that they were already fulfilled or will be fulfilled in the near future. When Peter said, "The end of all things is at hand," he meant it. When James said, "The judge is standing at the door," he meant it. When Jesus said, "This generation will not pass away," he meant that generation that he was speaking to at that time. When we read Scripture that way, immersion before application, it doesn't lose power. It gains clarity and it becomes more powerful. The warnings land where they were aimed. The promises stand firm, and we can live as resurrection people, not waiting for the kingdom to come, but building within the kingdom that's already here. All right, now that we've gone through all of this, what next? First of all, I highly recommend you to keep the habit. Choose a gospel or a letter and reread it in context. It will continue to reveal things to you that you didn't see the first time. I can guarantee you, because that's what's happened with me as we've gone through this reading plan that I created. I mean, it's been amazing. I've been going through it with you, and there are things that jump out at me and that I see that are so powerful and so incredible. And then I encourage you, you know what, share this journey. Invite a friend to read with the 90-day plan. You can send them to k2m.foundation/NT90. It would be incredible if more people understood the New Testament scriptures in context. And so anyway, share this with people. And remember, the kingdom arrived with Jesus, the kingdom remains, the kingdom grows, you are a part of it. Now, I just want to give you a little glimpse of kind of what's coming up next for Seek, Go, Create and me and this project. And this is pretty exciting. This is what's coming. The reading plan was part of a bigger project that I've been working on, and I've called it This Generation. If you want to stay up to date, make sure you go to that k2m.foundation/NT90 and download the reading plan. That'll get you on our email list, and it'll keep you up to date. We'll be updating items as they are created and projects that I'm working on. And here's what's coming. These are the things that I've got on my list, and it may spin off into other things, but here's a few things. First of all, I want to put the reading plan that you've just gone through that has the videos, the audio, and also a lot of the things that I shared on social media. I'm going to put that in book form, and I want it to be a print version of this 90-day plan. And I would like to have it for both individuals and for small groups. I think it would be so powerful to read through the New Testament in context, in order, out loud in small group settings, similar to what the first audience experienced. So that's one project. And then there's this thing I've been calling the deluxe edition. It's the New Testament scriptures themselves included in the book, placed in chronological order, with the introductions and in the immersions woven in. Everything you need in one, I'm calling it a deluxe volume. And then this is something a little bit different, but it's what I'm most excited about. It was sort of what started me thinking about this. As I started reading the New Testament in context, I found myself picturing what it was like to be there, to be in the room when the letter arrived, to hear it read aloud for the first time. That's what led to some of the short, immersive stories that I shared at the end of each episode, if you've listened in to the episodes during the reading plan. Now, what that's really led to is something bigger. I have been working on fiction that is set in the scriptural and historical events. And it's stories that let us really immerse ourselves in this powerful time of history. What I believe is the most significant time of history, the time from the resurrection to Revelation and all that went on in between, the things that we have just seen as we've read the New Testament in order and in context. But more on those fiction stories soon. For now, grab the reading plan, stay connected, and keep reading in context. Thanks for going along this journey of reading the New Testament, and thank you for listening in on this episode, The End of the Age.